The most effective way to destroy people is to destroy and obliterate their own understanding of their history. George Orwell. For the past 50+ years, our LGBTQ historians, artists, writers and scholars have been restoring our stories to their rightful place among our people, unearthing what has been kept from us. Our stories have been denied, omitted, and erased. Many times, the dominant culture has tried to wipe out any positive record and contributions that we have made. Sadly, to say that many times our own people have had a hand in this process. But the knocking from within, the taste of liberation, the yearning to be free, overtakes all hands that try to push us back. We learned to fight back. This video is the story of people that fought back, that refused to take no for an answer. People who set out to upset the apple cart of straight dominance, people that sought to free themselves and, in the process, free all of us. This video is just some of our stories. It is our hope that it will inspire all of us to continue this work, to stand up and fight back. We must continue to reclaim and to celebrate all that is rightfully ours. This video is dedicated to Anya Shedler, our comrade in Queers Without Borders, and to all of our liberation warriors who left us way too soon. Foster Gunnison Jr. moved to Hartford, Connecticut, and in 1964 he visited the New York City offices of the Mattachine Society. He explained to receptionist Craig Rodwell, a radical figure in the society, and an organizing force throughout the city, that he had known for some time, which he was not developing into a heterosexual. Gunnison, who was in his early 40s, was looking for opportunities to volunteer. Gunnison's involvement with the Homophile movement began to accelerate during that summer, and so, he joined the East Coast Homophile organization, made up of the Daughters of Bilitis, Janus Society, and the New York and D.C. Mattachine Society. Gunnison was appointed the chairperson of the Credentials Committee, with the job of deciding who should, or should not, be invited to attend conferences of the East Coast Homophile organizations. In 1966, Gunnison wrote The Agony of the Mask, making a strong plea for ending the secrecy of homosexuality, and to openly avow one's homosexuality. He wrote, "This is the only way that homosexuals can repair the damage done to them and to win the support of institutions." In 1967, Gunnison founded the Institute of Social Ethics in Hartford, Connecticut. The institute would maintain the records and archives of the American Homophile movement, facilitate communications among the organizations, and handle business for the groups. According to friends of Gunnison's, he collected every scrap of paper, leaflets, minutes of meetings, books, newspapers, and anything else sent to him by contacts concerning the early homosexual movements in the United States. Gunnison was one of the organizers of the 1970 Christopher Street Liberation Day March, which began at the Stonewall Inn, and the ending point in Cheap Meadow Central Park. Thousands had gathered to the shouts of "Gay and Proud." By 1969, Gunnison shook off his mainstream approach to gay rights, and declared that he was opposed to the notion that heterosexuality is somehow the norm by which all relationships must be judged. He urges homosexuals to expose themselves for who they are, and to aim for free and open expressions of affection. In the name of these goals, he calls for radical militant tactics including confrontation, street demonstrations, blatant and hard-hitting assaults on social institutions, and even welcomes were called for riots and violence. After Gunnison's death, the archives of the Institute of Social Ethics were given to the Dodd Center at the University of Connecticut. Keith Brown, founder of Connecticut Gay Liberation Front and Gay Spirit Radio, has documented in his archives the Scarlet Letter H, the beginnings of gay liberation in Connecticut, documented May 20 to July 25, 2008. I also have a copy of his handwritten story in my personal archives. As Keith remembers, I came out publicly at Newington High School in the spring of 1965. I chose as my vehicle to make a statement regarding the historic oppression of gay people, the Scarlet Letter A, as Hester Prynne wore on her garment to stigmatize her as a sexual sinner, an adulteress, in the sexually repressed society of Puritan New England. I seized on this symbol while reading the book in American literature class. In my room, at my writing desk, upstairs in our little house at 35 Whiteside Street in Newington, I made 2 or 3 capital letter H's in bright red ink. This red letter was on a white cardboard backing about 5 inches in size. Note that I came out to my mother at the age of 14. I wore the letter H in classes and in the hallways of Newington High. I also wore it out of doors, coming and going to school, through the streets of Newington. Whenever people would ask me what the letter H stood for, I told them it is H for homosexual or homosexuality. This, wearing of the letter H, constituted my personal protest and coming out in 1965. I also discovered, over time, that wearing it publicly had a lot more impact than I had anticipated. Actually, the wearing of the letter H had almost no immediate bad repercussions for me. No, I was not beaten up, no, people did not scream faggot at me in public places. Maybe people were just stunned by the boldness of my gesture. A few boys tried to pull it off my shirt or coat. Once or twice they succeeded, but I always pinned it right back in place. A little information about Canon Jones. In 1966, Canon Jones began a counseling ministry, under the auspices of the Greater Hartford Council of Churches, aimed particularly at homosexuals. During this time, he was a member of the Project H Committee, whose task was to study the subject of homosexuality. An early task of Project H was a study period during which they met with George W. Henry Foundation in New York City, whose charter was to help those who by reason of sexual variation were in trouble with themselves, the law or society. Eventually Project H obtained chapter status within the foundation. During this period, Canon Jones became acquainted with the Erickson Educational Foundation, known for its interest in transsexualism. As his counseling ministry evolved, he began to counsel those who were transsexual, transvestite, or who might have other anxieties arising out of their sexual identity or response. During these early years, he found that adequate resources for referral was difficult since the Hartford community did not provide avenues for assistance. So he began to send transsexual counselees for evaluation, hormone therapy, and eventually for surgery, while continuing their personal counseling relationship. By the autumn of 1972, he had counseled about 30 male and female transsexuals, of which a few had completed sex reassignment, with the majority on hormonal therapy or awaiting surgery. He soon realized that communication among this group was occurring, and so he made the suggestion that they meet together as a group to share feelings, ask questions, and perhaps begin providing peer support. On the first Saturday of these meetings, 8 persons attended, with Canon's role as moderator and expediter. And just in that one first session, it became immediately apparent that such sharing could be useful.
This is actually true now, I'm going to tell you. We had been meeting for quite a little while. We used to meet every month, I think. When somebody said, you know, some of us, I bet, don't know a homosexual. And so, well, all right. So they looked at me, and because I had started these groups, you see, and they said, well, Clint Kennedy, you must know somebody. I said, well, I do. I know quite a few, but I said, I would hesitate to ask them to come because they're so frightened about their being identified, you know. Well, then somebody said, maybe we could put a bag over their head and just cut out the thing so that, you know, make holes in the bag. Now that's where we were way back then, you see. And so they formed the George W. Henry Foundation, which had a motto of to help those who by reason of their homosexuality were in trouble with themselves, society, or the law. And Dr. Grusse did a great deal in those days helping people, because those days homosexuals were thrown out of their families, thrown out of their churches, thrown out of their jobs, and of course many flocked to New York where you got lost, and so, but so often they came without any money or any job or any place to stay. So this foundation tried to find help for them. So we then asked him to come to Hartford and help us, and we established a chapter of the George Henry Foundation here in Hartford, and I became the head of that. And then later on, when Dr. Grusse died, I became head of the whole foundation. And so that's how I began to get involved in the counseling, because people would come to our Project H committee and they would have some problem with their family, or just last night when I was at a housewarming party, somebody came up to me and said, well, Canon, You won't remember me, but I was 16 when I came to see you, and I knew I was gay, but my family were troubled, and I was troubled, and I didn't know what to do. And you helped me, and he said I've had a wonderful life, and he was very appreciative. So that's the kind of thing that we did in those days. There's another dimension, if it's all right to bring this in. When I was starting in this and working with it, I also began to identify people who were what we now call transsexual. Mm-hmm. The transsexual is a whole different story, but anyway, and once again back to New York, I discovered the Erickson Educational Foundation, which was founded by quite a wealthy man in Louisiana who was actually a female-to-male transsexual. He gave $1 million to do this. And they were very helpful with material. Also, they sponsored a convention every other year. Then we established our own transsexual organization, which is still going. And that's called the 20 Club XX, which stands for transsex. Those days, you see, you had to use synonyms and things because it was too blatant to just put it right out. So, and we also organized the Gender Identity Clinic of New England, which is a professional organization which evaluates people who are transsexual. Our board I've been on the board as one of the founding members of the board. We have a psychiatrist, a psychologist, an endocrinologist, and we've had other professionals, doctors, lawyers. It's a very fine group.
How did the Kalos Society come into being? These few notes answer the question. Early in 1964, a small number of persons in Hartford, both professional and non-professional, were motivated to express concern for those who might be facing problems arising out of their homosexual feelings or actions. This group became the formally recognized Project H Committee of the Social Service Department, and was formally registered as such with Connecticut's Secretary of State. In March of 1966, a telephone was listed in the name of the foundation and placed in the office of one of the members of the committee who offered to serve as the point of contact. At the same time, a simple brochure, Help for the Homosexual, was printed and distributed to all of the clergy of the greater Hartford area as well as to many of the social service agencies in the city. It was through this counseling program that Kalos was actually brought into being. 3 counselees agreed to meet together for a single session in May of 1968 to consider the possibilities of a group. 2 more counselees joined the second meeting. 11 arrived for the third evening, and through invitations to persons they knew, the group soon enlarged to nearly 25. At the outset, the Kalos Society considered its task to be educational, which meant not only expanding the understanding of their own sexuality, but also trying to interpret homosexuality to the wider community. Slowly it became apparent that fellowship and group consciousness were important. The administrative structure was simple: a treasurer and an informal committee to arrange programs for the ensuing 2 months period. Eventually, as Kalos membership increased, the need to establish a more formal organization became apparent. A slate of officers was elected and various committees established to work on program, membership, and publicity. After several sessions, there was the need for a constitution and bylaws, which is now being processed for proper recognition by the state. During this process, the purposes of the society have been expanded to offer a widened social life for those both in Hartford and other nearby urban centers. At present, more than 100 persons, both male and female, have become active in the group. Although the Project H Committee and Kalos have no organic relationship, they continue to find ways in which they are useful to each other, and no doubt will continue to do so in the future.
No more.
A remembrance of MCC by Clyde Prosh, MCC Hartford, began in his idea, when Kalos Society, Gay Liberation Front, was the only game in town. We had heard about a church for gay and lesbian people, and knew there was one in Boston, which we had contacted. Their pastor, along with pastoral candidate, F.J. Deacon, drove down to a meeting hosted by Reverend Canon Jones, and we found out more about MCC from them. After they left, we thought it would be good to have an MCC in Hartford. Ironically, on their way back, J. Deacon thought that when he completed his studies at the Cambridge Theological Seminary, he would like to come to Hartford to pastor MCC there. Our first service was in the home of Morris Pike, a pastor at the Congregational Church, across from the Mark Twain House. There were 12 in attendance. Shortly after, we began the first in a long series of moves to the Unitarian Meeting House near the University of Hartford. I was the pianist through all of this. Jay was our pastor for 5 years, and took us through our growing pains. He left for Chicago, and another theological student, Stephen Peters, became our second pastor. The joke was that they passed on Interstate 90, going in opposite directions. There were several outreaches that sprang from MCC in the early days. One was the long-running coffee house, started and run by Bob Marche, another longtime member. Another was the Metroline News magazine, started by John Crowley, at MCC Hartford. MCC is now well established in Hartford, and respected by our fellow mainline churches. We now have our longest-running pastoral leadership, with Reverend George Chen and Reverend Julio Flores. They are the glue that holds everything together, and provides stability to our small community. It has been my pleasure to be associated with MCC Hartford all these years, not only with the music, but as a longtime board of directors member. Continuing the core values of faith, spiritual growth, welcome, and celebration, community, social justice. Reverend Aaron Miller now leads the congregation in Hartford. In 1975, Ivan and Leading Ladies of New York drag show is shut down at Finocchio's East in West Hartford after a complaint was made to the state liquor commissioner. Connecticut state law prohibited entertainment at a liquor establishment where men dressed as women or women dressed as men. Like so many other bars at that time, frequented by lesbian and gay people, a threat was made to the owner of Finocchio's that if he allowed the show to continue, the liquor license for the premises would be taken away. By 1976, things began to heat up when the Chateau de Ville Dinner Theatre in East Windsor allowed French dressing, a troupe of female impersonators, to perform. Ivan was upset because his show at Finocchio's East in West Hartford was closed by the State Liquor Commission. Ivan stated, "That show will open over my dead body unless my show is also allowed to go on." Ivan brought his case to the legal clinic of the University of Connecticut School of Law. Louis Parley and a team of Yukon lawyers were prepared to file suit in federal court against the Liquor Control Commission, seeking to overturn the provision on the basis of unconstitutionality, claiming that the law was overly broad, vague, and enforced in an unequal and discriminatory fashion. According to an article in the Hartford Courant of March 1976, a hearing by the State Liquor Commission was held on March 29, in Hartford. The proposed approved regulations would eliminate the ban on male and female impersonators, but they would leave intact a rule barring live entertainment, including impersonations, without prior approval of the Commission. It was declared a major win, and a celebration of a new freedom that male and female impersonators before this could not enjoy. On Sunday, January 30, 1977, Ivan Valentine and his Leading Ladies of New York put on their show in celebration of the new regulations passed by the Connecticut State Liquor Commission. The show was held at Mr. Dominic's Mark Restaurant, in Canton, Connecticut. The show was the first conducted in the state since such acts were legalized. The show was a thank you gesture toward Dominic Cifarelli, who helped to repeal the law, and vowed to continue the fight against the new law banning entertainers mixing with patrons. The New Haven Women's Liberation Movement, Kalos, was primarily a male organization, and it took a number of years before lesbians empowered their voices and issues. However, in New Haven there was a strong women's liberation group and center. This women's liberation group began in 1968. Over the next few years, the women's liberation movement mushroomed and became more autonomous. Women's liberation activists at that time saw themselves as part of a broad multi-issue left. In November of 1969, the Free Our Sisters, Free Ourselves demonstration was organized to support the 7 Panther women who were accused of participating in a conspiracy to commit murder and were being treated harshly in the state prison for women. Women's Liberation co-sponsored the march, with the New Haven chapter of the Black Panther Party. The New Haven Women's Center was at the center women's liberation activities. Between the early 1970s and the late 1980s, the focus of the New Haven women's liberation movement shifted from efforts to make changes in social and political institutions to providing services that addressed women's needs and supporting individual change. During this time, it was natural that lesbians gravitated toward the women's movement. Though they expressed discouragement that some women's organizations, including NOW, did not want to engage in a diverse representation of women. Coming out accurately describes the journey for some women in New Haven, who claimed a lesbian identity through the women's movement. For others, however, coming in or becoming more closely described their experience to actively fight for rights lesbians felt they were entitled to. An example of coming out in the women's movement was that of Chris Patty, who stayed away from New Haven women's liberation for over a year, before becoming involved in 1970. "I was afraid people would think I was a lesbian if I associated with all those women. I was not a lesbian at that time, and most other women weren't either. Those who were kept very quiet about it." Since then, though, Chris has hardly kept quiet about the issue. There were significant tensions between lesbian and heterosexual women in the mid-1970s, and many heterosexual women withdrew from women's movement activities. By the 1980s there were no longer any heterosexual women on the board of the New Haven Women's Center. It seemed heterosexual women felt that they were judged negatively by lesbians in the movement. This shift was coincident with a move away from action-oriented programs to more service and community-building activities and an increasing emphasis on personal rather than political change. Some notable accomplishments of the New Haven Women's Center were: 1. Women vs. Connecticut, which organized a movement around the legal challenge to Connecticut's abortion law, and after legalization gave birth to an abortion clinic that provided reproductive health and education in a feminist setting. 2. Sister, which developed out of the Women's Liberation newsletter, became a lively and broad-ranging monthly that applied feminist issues to a wide range of topics such as women in the Vietnam War, children, motherhood, work, women in prison. It published until the late 70s. 3. A rare money-making enterprise that was extremely successful was the Pro Se Divorce Kit produced by the Women in Divorce Group. How to do a divorce without lawyers. The Women's Center lasted until the early 1990s.
I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore, and I know too much to go back and pretend, 'cause I've heard it all before, and I've been down there on the floor. No one's ever gonna keep me down again. Well, yes, I'm wise, but it's wisdom on a pain. Yes, I paid the price, but look how much I gained. If I have to, I can do anything. I am strong.
The New Haven Women's Liberation Rock Band and the Chicago Women's Liberation Rock Band, 1969 to 1973, sought to challenge the genre of rock music by installing women's voices and feminist lyrics into the musical canon. "We love to dance," stated bassist and vocalist Susan Abode, referring to a song like the Rolling Stones' "Under My Thumb." "We were dancing to songs that were degrading to us." The Women's Liberation Rock Band was rooted in principles that came to be identified as socialist feminism, and focusing on projects in education, service, and direct action, by and for women. Every time they played, the band summoned up the ecstasy of the utopian vision of a world without hierarchy and domination.
Papa, don't lay that shit on me, well, it just don't compensate. No, Papa, don't lay that shit on me, well, I can't accommodate. Well, you bring me down, it makes you cool. You think I like it, you're a goddamn fool. Papa, don't lay that shit on me, well, it just don't compensate. Well, Papa, don't lay those sounds on me, I ain't your groovy chick. No, Papa, don't lay those sounds on me, don't you know they make me sick. Well, Rolling Stones, blood, sweat, and tears, I've taken that shit for too many years. Papa, don't lay those sounds on me, I ain't your groovy chick. Well, Papa, I ain't your friend no more, and I ain't gonna make your bed. Well, Papa, I ain't your friend no more, well, you better get a dog instead. Well, backstreet girl under my thumb, start looking out where you're coming from. Papa, I ain't your friend no more, and I ain't gonna make your bed. Well, Papa, don't lay that shit on me, you just don't turn me on. Well, Papa, don't lay that shit on me, the fun, the games are gone. Well, was my game and was my fun, and all that trash and it's over and done. Papa, don't lay that shit on me, you just don't turn me on. Keep on trucking, mama, trucking all your blues away. Keep on trucking, mama, truck till the break of day. I wake up in the morning, I wake up late, I down to the corner and get yourself a date. Woo! Can't stop doing what you do to me, you're just gonna run me wild.
1970 marked a new decade of war in Vietnam, the FBI targeting of civil rights leaders, and a president who called students bums and drew up an enemies list. It also marked a new phase for the growing lesbian and gay liberation movement. That year Hartford native Susan Saxe, Catherine Power and a handful of others decided to rob a Massachusetts bank in 1970 for the revolution. A police officer was killed by one man in the group. Saxe and Powers went underground. The FBI organized a nationwide dragnet for the fugitives. The feds invaded women's groups and swept through lesbian communities in Hartford, New Haven and around the country with a newly sharpened tool, the grand jury. William Kunstler, famed defense attorney, came to Connecticut to tell the public that grand juries were being used by prosecutors as tools to strip citizens of their rights. They are running wild over this country, Kunstler warned. In Connecticut, women activists found this out the hard way. Ellen Grusse, Terry Turgeon, Diana Perkins and Mary Ann Palmer were subpoenaed in March 1975 by the prosecutor, but refused to talk to a New Haven grand jury. Perkins eventually provided limited testimony. Palmer's case was dismissed. The legal action sent a chill through feminist and lesbian organizing efforts. Grusse and Turgeon was recalled to the grand jury in 1975 and once again refused to name names. "We don't want to go to prison, but we will," Grusse said. They spent 7 months in the Niantic State Prison, the length of the grand jury's operation. On March 27, 1975, Susan Saxe was arrested in Philadelphia after spending 5 years underground for participating in the theft of FBI documents and a bank robbery that left a police officer dead. In her statement, this white radical declared, "I intend to fight on in every way as a lesbian, a feminist, and an Amazon." This linking of lesbianism, feminism, and the mythical figure of the Amazon is usually associated with lesbian separatism. Yet Saxe, like the other lesbian and gay activists Hobson highlights, saw lesbian feminism and gay liberation as frameworks for critical analysis of multiple forms of oppression that could be expressed through coalitional, transnationally engaged work. By bringing Saxe and other little-known figures to our attention alongside analysis of the thinking and activism of better-known figures such as Pat Parker, Hobson explores the ways that gay and lesbian leftists in the second half of the Cold War positioned sexual liberation as part of a broader left agenda.
This is an introduction to the 18-year legislative effort to include sexual orientation in Connecticut's non-discrimination statutes. Following the 1970 Kalos petition to legislators and the defeat of the bill in 1972, The gay and lesbian community in Connecticut continued for another 18 years to seek enacting into law legislation adding sexual orientation to the Connecticut's non-discrimination statutes. Below is a high-level summary of each year this bill was raised. 1975 legislative year. In early April the sexual orientation bill was raised again, as in 1971, in the Human Rights and Opportunities Committee with full support of the committee. 10 persons spoke in favor of the bill, including the Reverend Canon Jones, and no one against the bill. Among the organizations backing the bill are the Connecticut Civil Liberties Union, Planned Parenthood League of Connecticut, the Connecticut Education Association and the state chapter of the National Organization of Women. The bill would add sexual orientation to the state's non-discrimination statutes. In mid-April, Governor Grusse stated she had reservations about this legislation, following the bill's passage in the state Senate by a vote of 23 to 11. Again, the issue of homosexual teachers was the stumbling block for the bill's passage. On April 23, the State House of Representatives defeated the sexual orientation bill by a vote of 87 to 60, primarily due to the issue of homosexual teachers. 1976 legislative year. In February 1976, the Human Rights and Opportunities Committee passed the sexual orientation bill out of committee to the House of Representatives. During the committee hearing, many people spoke in support of the bill, and there are a number of people who testify that they did not want homosexuals teaching their children. On February 12, Chris Patty, of the National Women's Political Caucus, spoke at a panel A Question of Civil Rights, What Connecticut Women Need to Know About the Sexual Orientation Bill held at the Hartford YWCA. Chris also sent a letter to the editor on February 27 in support of the sexual orientation bill. Unfortunately, in May 1976, the sexual orientation bill was defeated, in one of the first bill votes, in the Connecticut General Assembly. 1977 legislative year. The sexual orientation bill was raised again in the 1977 legislative session. It was voted out of the Human Rights and Opportunities Committee and sent to the General Assembly for a vote in March 1977. The Connecticut Gay Task Force and about 50 supporters crowded into the hearing room and reacted vocally to speakers for and against the bill. Though again, as in prior years, the bill failed to pass on the floor of the General Assembly. Not until 1983 was another sexual orientation bill raised in the Connecticut General Assembly, this time by the newly formed Greater Hartford Lesbian and Gay Task Force. The Greater Hartford Lesbian and Gay Task Force formed in October 1979, and a key component of this task force was the Political Action Committee, which grew into a separate statewide lobbying group. When this task force disbanded in 1984, 2 standing committees of the task force continued as separate groups, the Hartford Gay Health Collective and the Gay Spirit Radio Collective. 1983 legislative year. The task force did raise the sexual orientation bill in 1983, a year before it disbanded. However, rather than raising it as a House bill, it was raised as Senate Bill 398, to avoid the first general vote to be in the House of Representatives. This tactic appeared to work, for on April 20, 1983 the bill finally passed out of the Senate with a 20 to 15 vote tally. Though in May of 1983 Senate Bill 398 failed in the House by a vote of 92 against and 49 in favor. A change in tactics, given the failures of the bill to pass both houses of the Connecticut General Assembly. In the summer of 1983 a group of men and women, frustrated by the legislative losses, discussed the plight of its success for passage in Connecticut. They concurred that the effort must continue, but a more organized and targeted approach was needed. They decided to form a statewide organization dedicated to the accomplishment of civil rights legislation, and in 1984 formally created the Coalition of Lesbian and Gay Civil Rights. The group in 1984 chose not to try to pass legislation in 1985 for a multitude of reasons, given the current local national political climate of that time. The coalition members specifically aimed toward gaining civil rights and legal protection for homosexuals, yet they also wished to build a strong lesbian and gay community. In an attempt to achieve these goals, the Coalition for Lesbian and Gay directed its efforts toward a multitude of issues. These included working with progressive political organizations, other minority groups, religious affiliates, educators, and legal, social, and health professionals. The first difficult decision the Coalition for Lesbian and Gay faced was whether or not to try to pass gay rights legislation in 1985. Connecticut citizens had attempted to do so since 1973. The coalition ultimately chose not to make a legislative attempt in 1985 because they felt there was little chance of winning due to the domination of conservative Republicans in Connecticut's General Assembly, and the re-election of President Ronald Reagan. The period between 1985 and 1987 was marked by other important decisions and changes. In 1985, the group established 4 regions throughout the state: Eastern Connecticut, Hartford area, New Haven area, and Western Connecticut. Establishing a statewide network allowed for a wider range of membership, and made the distribution of various tasks around the state possible when it came to the big issues, such as the bill. In 1986, members of the statewide Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Rights renamed the group the Connecticut Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Civil Rights. 1987, first year that the coalition raises bill since formed in 1985. House Bill 7584 raised an act concerning discrimination on the basis of sexual status, would have added the word sexual status to the CT Civil Rights Non-Discrimination Statutes. The House cast a second vote of 73 to 73 which defeated the bill. Earlier in the session both the House and Senate passed the anti-discrimination legislation with some amendments. In the first week of April the bill addressed a public hearing at which over 25 advocates spoke on behalf of the bill and only 2 in opposition. And on April 8 the bill was passed out of the Judiciary Committee to the House by a vote of 19 to 7. In 1988 no bill was raised. In 1988, however, the Connecticut Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Civil Rights formed a political action committee in January 1988. The first co-chairs were Charlotte Kinloch and Crispin Hollings. 1989 was a year of direct action. The sexual orientation bill was raised again during the 1989 legislative session. In a 15-11 vote the Judiciary Committee voted on February 10, 1989 to approve the Gay and Lesbian Civil Rights Bill, sending it to House for a vote. Betty Gallo, lobbyist for the Connecticut Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Civil Rights, said she believed the bill would pass given the strong support of newly elected congressional reps. Unfortunately, this bill died again in the House by a 79 to 71 vote. However, immediately following the defeat of the bill, the Connecticut Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Civil Rights sent pink carnations to supportive legislators, and pink sheets stating, "Your ignorance is appalling but your votes are killing us," to the opposition. On June 7, 1989, supporters held the rally at the state capitol. Simultaneously, members of a spontaneously formed direct action group, including Sean Lang, interrupted the Connecticut General Assembly by chanting and hanging banners from the House Visitors Gallery. The nonviolent demonstrators were asked to leave, and some were forcibly removed by the Capitol Police. The coalition went ahead with full force and adopted a "We Refuse to Disappear" campaign. Much internal controversy surrounded the existence of the coalition's direct action group. While some members supported direct action, others were emphatically opposed to it. The end result was the splitting off of the direct action group into a separate entity with no affiliation to the Connecticut Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Civil Rights. This new organization, the Lesbian and Gay Direct Action Group, which took the name Queer Nation Hartford in 1990, maintained its presence at the Capitol, most notably interrupting a speech by Governor O'Neill on February 7, 1990, during which 12 people were arrested. 1991. The sexual orientation bill was again raised as HB 7133 in 1991 and was passed successfully out of the Judiciary Committee, as the bill said for many years. Around April 11, 1991, the House passed the bill by an 81 to 65 margin. Nearly 200 people in the Visitors Gallery applauded this passage following the final vote count. Note that this year, due to agreed modifications by Representative Tulisano in the bill language, the Catholic Church agreed not to oppose the bill this year. On April 17, the bill passed the last congressional hurdle with a 21 to 14 Senate vote in favor of the bill. Governor Lowell P. Weicker Jr. signed the legislation into law on Wednesday, May 1, 1991, approximately 18 years after a gay rights bill was first introduced in the Connecticut General Assembly.
Where are we going today, Mr. Peabody?
Not where, Sherman. When?
For we were born to be free. It's a gay spirit singing in our hearts, leading us through these troubled times. It's a gay spirit
And joining us now in studio is Keith Brown, who's a longtime producer and host of the Gay Spirit radio program on WWUH 91.3 FM. That's the University of Hartford's radio station. Keith, welcome to our show.
Yes, good morning.
And William's joining us via Skype today. Now, I understand, Keith, your show is America's longest continuously running LGBTQ radio show. You helped put Gay Spirit on the air back in 1980. Then you became host and producer in 1983. So how did it all start?
I am convinced that it's the longest continuously broadcast radio program of its kind. There should be another radio show on the West Coast, IMRU, on Pacifica Radio out of Los Angeles. That show, if I remember correctly, was founded in 1973, but was not continuous in broadcast. When Gay Spirit Radio began its broadcasts, Thanksgiving of 1980, those broadcasts have been continuous week by week on Thursday evenings ever since.
Well, congratulations. That's quite a feat. One of the reasons we wanted to have you on the show, besides to talk about Gay Spirit Radio, we wanted...
Today, Mr. Peabody.
Not where, Sherman. When?
AIDS in Connecticut. In Connecticut, 2 cases were reported to the State Health Department, the Department of Health Services, in 1981. In December 1981, at Yale New Haven Hospital, the first Connecticut person was diagnosed with the same mystery illness that was killing gay and bisexual men across the country. Meanwhile, the number of new cases increased exponentially, and Connecticut soon followed. Emphasis was placed by the Connecticut DHS on characterizing the new disease. Extensive interviews of all new cases were conducted because the degree and the modes of communicability were not known. Like most brand new diseases, this new entity was voluntarily reportable. At that time it was not known by the moniker AIDS. Like the rest of the country, Connecticut's early cases were predominantly young gay men. But even at this early stage, cases due to the infusion of blood products were beginning to arise. Cases resided, most commonly, in those counties closest to New York City, Fairfield and New Haven. People describe the epidemic as moving up the corridor formed by the interstate highways I-95 and I-91. At first, the so-called general public was not aware of the new disease and did not express high levels of anxiety. However, the first affected community, the gay community, was quite soon aware of the seriousness of the situation and started mobilizing. In 1983, a group of gay medical professionals started the Hartford Gay and Lesbian Health Collective, offering services to gay men to obtain diagnosis and treatment for STDs, and lesbians to obtain important health information. The collective's first clinic is located at the Community Health Services, opening in 1984, with a Thursday evening clinic. In 1986, the clinic is one of 2 sites, funded by the state, to provide HIV counseling and testing. The first community in Connecticut, hit hard by AIDS, established the first AIDS-specific service and educational organization in the state. A dozen persons from New Haven founded, in 1983, AIDS Project New Haven. AIDS Project New Haven was modeled after organizations in the gay community, providing leadership on AIDS prevention and care, such as New York City's gay men's health crisis. Such organizations depended heavily on volunteers as they developed innovative education programs. Soon thereafter, other AIDS projects, such as AIDS Project Hartford and the Northwest Connecticut AIDS Project, were founded elsewhere in Connecticut. At first, AIDS Project New Haven did not receive grants or technical assistance. The project raised all its funds through informal means, such as individual donations, car washes, bake sales, and the like. In the late spring of 1985, a major fundraiser at the Schubert Theater in New Haven raised $19,000 and permitted the hiring of a half-time executive director. In 1984, 2 staff members of the Hartford Hispanic Health Council held one of Hartford's first educational forums, addressing the political aspects of the AIDS crisis, namely, government inaction. 75 gay men attended the meeting. An statewide AIDS program had to be established. It was created, by executive order of the governor, in September 1985. With the advent of a quick, inexpensive, and reliable test for HIV antibodies in 1985, federal money started to flow into the states, including Connecticut. Connecticut was one of the first states, in the country, to offer HIV counseling and testing on-site in drug treatment programs. In 1985, AIDS Project Hartford is founded, with the mission to provide education and support services for all people affected by HIV/AIDS in the greater Hartford region, empowering them to maintain dignity and improve their quality of life. During the next 2 decades, AIDS Project Hartford evolved from an organization fighting to help people face an imminent death into one focused on helping people live a longer life with hope and dignity. In 1986, Southeast Connecticut AIDS Project was founded, and today known as the Alliance for Living, to assist local citizens living with HIV/AIDS. The New Haven Mayor's Task Force was a catalyst for policy in the region, and by extension, the state. This group created proposals, and completed the organizing, needed to start a program of outreach to injecting drug users, including passing out bleach to clean needles, in 1987. The New Haven Mayor's Task Force also completed early comprehensive community-based needs assessments. In time, they addressed the issue of access to clean needles. Other local and regional task forces began soon thereafter, either due to perceived need or in response to contractual expectations of DHS. On September 29, 1988, Connecticut Act Out protested in front of the Connecticut Department of Corrections in Hartford, demanding that incarcerated individuals have access to condoms and other preventative measures to reduce contractions of HIV/AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases. On October 22, 1988, the Connecticut Action Council sponsored an AIDS walk and candlelight vigil in honor of those who lost their lives to AIDS, as well as to raise awareness. In 1988, the first AIDS group home in CT opens, in Stamford. In 1988, Peter's Retreat opens in Hartford, with the goal of helping individuals and families living with HIV/AIDS to receive comprehensive and compassionate services necessary to live healthier lives and break the cycle of homelessness. After much wrangling and horse trading in the legislature, an HIV confidentiality law was passed, taking effect on October 1, 1989. Connecticut was the 35th state to pass a law protecting the confidentiality of HIV-related information. Building on the accomplishments of the first 8 years of the epidemic, some creative projects were launched at this time. The first mobile testing unit in the state, called the Hartford HIV Van, started. It was the beginning of outreach HIV counseling and testing in Connecticut, and one of the earliest such projects in the country. An even more radical concept was gaining adherence, especially in New Haven. It was needle exchange. In 1989, the Connecticut AIDS Residence Program, now known as Liberty Community Services, creates the first freestanding AIDS residence in Connecticut, the Supportive Living Program. In 1989, St. Luke's Community Services, now known as Inspirica, opened the McKinney House, a supportive housing residence for people living with AIDS. At the beginning of the 1980s, AIDS was unknown. At the close of the first decade of AIDS, an estimated 12,000 to 15,000 persons in Connecticut were HIV infected, 1,600 AIDS cases had been diagnosed, and 1,100 had died. In those 10 years, the face of AIDS had changed, but not completely. Gay white men were still a major transmission category, but they were no longer predominant. Persons of color, women, and injection drug users were now heavily represented.
Co-chair of the Hartford chapter's HIV task force. He's on the board of the Hartford Gay and Lesbian Health Collective. He's a member of the Greater Hartford HIV Action Steering Committee and on the editorial board of Metroline. He is a mentor, a friend, and a brother. With a great deal of love, Victor DeLugan.
We gather today to celebrate pride in ourselves and our community. As we assemble, we recognize that we have confronted the impact of AIDS and the loss of our lovers, our brothers and sisters. We acknowledge those who have died and express our respect for the dignity they shared with us as gay men, as lesbians, as people with AIDS. My own path to gay pride encountered an unexpected event when in 1986 I tested HIV positive. My life was fundamentally altered. I looked at the landscape that was to be my life, the world of AIDS, and what I saw in 1986 was not affirming. The chief surgeon of a Wisconsin hospital suggested that he was refusing to treat PWAs, claiming he had a right to be selfish. A nationally syndicated column suggested that AIDS was an effective means of population control of undesirable people. In 1986, there was a 36% increase in suicides among PWAs. A local school board member was asked why he had voted to ban a teenager from school because he had AIDS. His response still echoes in my mind. He said, "I don't understand what the big deal is. The kid will probably be dead in a few months anyway." My life had become a continual review of medications, lab tests, physical exams. I did not know what I could do. The only role I saw for myself in 1986 was to die quickly and quietly. Out of desperation, I began to tell my friends about my health. My friends transformed my life. I am surrounded by people who demand, do not request, but demand, to be part of my ongoing struggle to survive and thrive. My life is a circle of people who permit me to confront my fears and theirs, who refuse to deny the reality of my infection and refuse to permit me to abandon the fullness of my life. The moment I let someone hold my hand, when I declared my trust in my friends, the light engulfed me. At that moment, I realized my role in the struggle around AIDS. I simply refuse to die quickly or quietly. I demand as my birthright a full and fair share of all that the world has to offer for my care, and I demand that it be delivered with the respect due me. I demand this birthright, not because I am white, not because I am male. We are African Americans, Anglos, Latinos, Asians. We are lesbians, bisexuals, heterosexuals, intravenous drug users. We are gay men. We are infants, children, adults, seniors. We are people with disabilities. We are homeowners. We are homeless. We are the people of this planet, and we demand a full and fair share of all this world has to offer. I live in a place where it is still impossible to mount a public campaign to talk to young gay men and lesbians about the joy, wonder, and eroticism of safe, healthy sex. I live in a world where healthcare, AIDS healthcare, must bow to politicians of apathy, corporate executives of greed, and sex-phobic moralists of guilt and shame. I will not sacrifice my life for apathy, indifference, and sexual sterility. I refuse to die quickly or quietly, and I have friends. To those who would not be with us today, to those who refuse to accept the reality of AIDS, to those who hide behind their homophobia and AIDS phobia, this HIV-infected queer has a simple message. Open your hearts, your minds, your hands. You have no choice. No matter what you say, despite what you do, We are surviving. We refuse to die quickly or quietly, and we have friends.
He was only 23, gone before he had his time. He came without a warning, didn't want his friend.
Someday we'll be free. I promise you we'll be free. If not tomorrow, then the day after that. And the candles in our hand will illuminate this land. If not tomorrow, then the day after that. And the world that brings us pain, that fills our lives with fear, on the day after that will disappear. And the war we fought to win, I promise you we will win. If not tomorrow, then the day after that, or the day after that. Someday we'll be free. I promise you we'll be free. If not tomorrow, then the day after that. And the candles in our hand will illuminate this land. If not tomorrow, then the day after that. And the world that brings us pain, that fills our lives with fear, on the day after that will disappear. And the war we fought to win, I promise you we will win. If not tomorrow, then the day after that.
Now famous, but then obscure words. Out of the cocoons and into the streets. To Hartford's first Lesbian and Gay Pride Festival. Let's release those balloons and take that uplifting feeling home with us. Thank you all for coming.
Understand that you co-founded and managed for many years the Reader's Piece, the only feminist bookstore in Hartford. Why and how did you do this?
Well, that was a wonderful period. There were 13 years that I was part of the Reader's Feast, and we first formed that back in '83. And it was a time when there was a lot of real coalition building. And in fact, Jesse Jackson had the Rainbow Coalition, and part of that was really bringing all kinds of issues together, like I was just talking about, sort of my commitment to issues of equality and justice. And so within that framework, that really fit with my feminist analysis too. So what we did was we organized all kinds of people from African American, Latino, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, although we didn't have anyone transgender, men and women, straight, who came together to say we wanted a place, and it could be a gathering place and a place where political events could occur, as well as having books and periodicals and all kinds of music, everything connected.
It's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am.
For the Hartford City Council?
Well, at the time, in 1989, there was a coalition called People for Change, which was a third party in Hartford, and it was a progressive political party, and it was made up of gay rights groups, Puerto Rican activists, labor unions, women's groups. I was part of that whole effort since 1987, and actually in 87 I tried to run. I sought the nomination but was rejected, but I decided to stay with the coalition, and we did get 2 people elected in 87, 2 activists, not gay, but 2 activists. Then in 89 I was chosen to run on the slate, and there were 3 of us who ran, and it was about empowering the gay community, trying to get access to City Hall, to advance gay and lesbian, bisexual issues at the time.
Did you accomplish any of these goals?
Well, first of all, I did not win the election, but I lost by about, depending on how you look at it, 141 votes against one of my running mates and 500 votes against the Republican. Because we were running as a team, but we were also could have beaten each other. So it depends on how you view it. But the fact that it was a close election, I think, showed that the gay and lesbian and bisexual community could mobilize and organize for electoral races, and that we were a voting bloc, that we had legitimate issues that we wanted addressed at the city level. I think it also had a positive impact statewide, because it was the first time someone ran citywide openly gay. state. So it broke that barrier. That would be number one for me. It broke a barrier that gay people could run for office. And even if we didn't win the first time, subsequent to that, we got people elected to city council. An out lesbian in 91. And then beyond that, other state reps had gotten elected. The other thing, issues we won on in Hartford, we wanted a gay, lesbian, bisexual commission to deal with our issues, a city commission, and that got established. Very few cities have such commissions, where it's a city-sanctioned body that looks at policy issues. So we worked on that. We in the political platform at the time of People for Change, we also advocated for domestic partnership benefits for partners of gay couples. We didn't win during that period, but in subsequent years it was adopted, but it was first advanced during our campaign. Needle exchange, which is a preventive measure to stop the spread of HIV, was passed. We also got the police, we got language put in different ordinances that also included sexual orientation protection. So we were very integrated into
Open up your closet. Love's not worth a damn.
we going today, Mr. Peabody?
Not where, Sherman. When?
In the welcome mat is on the floor. Let's begin. This story needs an ending.
Bisexual.
I like big girls, itty bitty boys, Mississippi girls, inner city boys. I like the pretty girls with the bow tie. Once the nails dry, let it blow dry. Just a bit weird. I like a clean face. I don't discriminate.
This is called the bisexual anthem. Bi pride, stand up.
I like girls, I like guys, I like to eat the pussy, then again I like to ride. Yeah, I like kissing on girls and then I put the dick inside. I'm bisexual, bitch, and I ain't got nothing to hide. Yeah, these bitches hating on me cause I'm confident in me. Better not forget the B and LGBT. And y'all like to say we selfish and y'all say we like love. I like girls, I like guys, I like to eat the pussy, then again I like to ride. Yeah, I like kissing on girls and then I put the dick inside. I'm bisexual, bitch, and I ain't got nothing to hide. Yeah, these bitches hating on me cause I'm confident in me. Better not forget the B and LGBT. And y'all like to say we selfish and y'all say we like to cheat, but I don't date both at the same time. Haters have a seat. I like girls, oh my gosh, big booty, big tits. I like guys too though, super sexy, big dick. And if you hating on me, ho, then I'm down, big shit. And if you curious, I got you, baby girl, quick fix. I met a cute little shorty way back in 08. I was really in denial, I was like, no way. I met a dude up in high school, I was so confused. How the fuck do I like girls? Then I started liking dudes. Then I realized, ain't no rules to this shit. Ain't no crime to like pussy, ain't no crime to like dick. Ain't no crime to be whoever, whenever, man, I'm sick. I'm a bi girl, bitch, little fly girl, bitch. B-I to the S-E-X-U-A. It's a L if you hating on me, bitch, I slay. No, I am not gay, and no, I am not straight.
But we have workshops, and I wanted to present a workshop for bi people, because there wasn't anything the first year. So I thought, I gotta find other bisexuals. I don't know where they are, and I want to march in the Pride Parade with a group of bi people so that we can say that we're here and we're gay too. So I did a workshop called Help Me Out Bi, or Bi, I don't even remember, but something, and about 15 people came, and one so we called her and invited her to come to this meeting that happened to start the Stonewall Congress, which was called the Congress for Lesbian and Gay Organizations. And I thought there's got to be a change to that. We have to have bi and trans people included in the name of that. So we decided to go and say something. So we also, this woman, Robin Whiting from Norwalk, had been running a bi rap group for a while, like since the mid-80s, I think. So we went and she stood up and made a statement that there should be bi inclusion. She had written an article that was in the Metro Line, which is a queer community paper and magazine. And we got them to change the name to Stonewall. And then it says, it's called Stonewall Congress, a lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender organization.
Came up with the combination.
Yeah, we had, after the Congress meeting, we broke up. At lunchtime, we were supposed to break up into regional groups, but we said, all the bi people come meet in this little room. And so we met in this room. There were probably 10 of us, probably. And we decided we would meet on a certain day at a diner in, maybe it was like in Britain. I don't remember where it was. I think it was, no, we went all the way to Norwalk because we wanted Robin to come and then she didn't show up.
Oh, sad.
Yeah, but the four of us, we brainstormed a whole list of names. We had all kinds of ideas, and we eventually came up with a combination.
Okay.
And we decided to meet at we would rotate where we were having our meetings. And gradually that became really time-consuming to drive really far and then not have very many people come or no one show up from that area. So we just started just meeting in Hartford. And we're still.
Now, is it like a support group for younger children?
No, Combination is an activist educational, social, political organizations. So we do presentations and bi stuff and try to make sure there's bi inclusion and different issues that come up. Make sure that the coalition, Love Makes a Family, has been working on, first they worked on adoption for same-sex couples, and then they're working on same-sex couple marriage, that they're thinking about bi people as well, and don't do anything that's going to create a problem for us in the future. But when I got to DC, I started volunteering at all the different gay organizations, the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, PFLAG, the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund, and there were comments were made because I was very, at first I didn't know that people were going to have a problem with me saying I was bi, so I would say, oh, you're not bi, and they say, oh. Yeah, I was much more looked down upon and less accepted at the time. So I was hanging out with a group of lesbians, and they were whispering about other people, oh, she's bi, she said she's bi. And so I was afraid to come out to them as bi. At bars, I would be at a bar and I would overhear conversations with people saying she's bi and pointing at people. I had lesbians say they don't date bisexuals to me. They found out I was bi, they wouldn't date me. Yeah, so it was hurtful. And I thought, this is really shocking. Yeah, I definitely didn't expect it. But and then the straight community, my experience was more men saying, all right, you're bi. And that's not the kind of thing that I was looking for either, so. Not really supporting. Yeah.
In May 1990, a second piece of legislation on hate crimes, increasing the penalties if a crime was committed due to the victim's race, religion, ethnicity or sexual orientation is passed in Connecticut. This was the first time in Connecticut that the words, sexual orientation were codified into state law. In June 1990, the first annual HIV Service Awards are held in Hartford City Hall, honoring community members for their work on HIV/AIDS issues.
In December 1990, Representative Joseph Grabarz Jr., of Bridgeport, identifies himself as a gay man, at a rally, and then held a press conference, to announce that he was gay. This coming out by Grabarz was a pivotal moment, in helping pass the Gay Rights Non-Discrimination Bill, the following year.
In 1990, Leslie Brett, chairwoman of the CT Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities and executive director of GWILF, wrote a public letter to all state legislators urging their support for the Lesbian Gay Civil Rights Bill and identifying herself as a lesbian. In 1990, Bay Area television reporter Paul Wynn dies of AIDS. Wynn had chronicled the development of his disease and his feelings as he neared death on a weekly video diary aired on KGO. In September, 20 segments made between January 11, 1990 to his final taping on June 20, 1990 are shown together for the first time at the Matrix Gallery, in the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford. Also, at this time Group Material, a group of 4 young artists exhibit, AIDS Timeline Hartford at the Matrix Gallery. The timeline begins in 1979 and traces the social, political and health concerns, using art, archival material and annual statistics. The timeline also addresses the impact homophobia and racism had on the formulation of effective public policy. In September 1990, Real Artways sponsors, Group Material bus poster campaign quoting President George Bush and addressing the insurance industry based in Hartford. The quote stated, "Like many of you, Barbara and I have had friends who have died of AIDS. Once disease strikes, we don't blame those who are suffering, we try to love them and care for them and comfort them. We don't fire them. We don't evict them, we don't cancel their insurance." To many this quote conveyed positive norms of behavior at odds with the actions of the administration in Washington. A pamphlet about the insurance industry and AIDS written by Marianne Staniszewski was also distributed by Real Artways to tie in with the poster publicity.
In 1992, Lesbians of Color and Kinship, LOCS, is formed in Hartford. Regina Dighton and Cheryl Linier are instrumental in starting this organization. Open to all women of color and their partners, LOCS is a statewide social organization.
Have you ever been, or are you now part of, any African American lesbian support groups?
I was. Actually, I helped to start one. I'm so sorry it had to go away. But it was called Saxe. A friend of mine, Ellen and I, did Lesbians of Color and Kinship for a few years. And then tragedy came to both of us. My ex-husband committed suicide. Then I was diagnosed with cancer. Her son was dying of AIDS. And I just didn't have the energy. And that's why, you need more leaders. Yeah. You need more people to just, to get up and do something. Yeah. To just say, we want this to, there were a lot more people than us involved, but it was us who said, okay, we're gonna have a meeting, we're gonna do this, we're gonna have a party, we're gonna have a dinner. Yeah. And I guess others are just like, we're sure do miss it. I know I've been thinking I need to just pull together a group over the holidays and say, how can we all share this? I loved it. I'm working very hard with my friend and colleague, Patricio Garcia, and a new person who's come to Project 100 to try to, we're working on a new program. It's called FACE. The acronym FACE standing for Featuring All Cultures and Ethnicities. Or give them face. And it's to put faces of color, or diverse faces on the movement. The LGBT movement is depicted, especially by the right, as an elitist movement of well-to-do white men who are all thin, all blondes, all have a martini in their hand, out on a yacht. Okay? Face is to give face to not just people of color, but poor white men, working class, struggling white men in overalls, with pudgy stomachs and no martini, can of beer, a Kool-Aid, glass of water, bag of chips, as well as those people of African descent, to put women on that face, to put disabled LGBT people on that face as well.
Why do you feel LGBT youth groups are important to a young adult growing up in today's society?
Oh, gosh. First of all, anybody who's older wishes they had them.
Yeah.
But it's important for the same reason that all youth organizations are important, is that youth need to be together, to be supported, to be validated, to be encouraged, to be cared for, and to learn, and to grow, and to set goals, and to learn that they can achieve them, and to know that they're fine just as they are, and to know, like, it's not you, honey, it's that crazy world out there.
Yeah.
What I put out there, I would put out there to see the common tie in all forms of oppression pitted against all oppressed people. I would put it out there that the majority of the wealth and resources in this country are owned and controlled by a very small majority. And that the only reason a small majority can keep control of everything is that the rest of us have been so well trained and so willing to fight and compete with one another that we never look up to see who's really pulling the strings, And so I would tell African Americans and Asian Americans, for example, that rather than picking and fighting back at each other, that they need to look upward, and I would tell Native Americans and Latinos and people with disabilities and the elderly, versus preschool education and all that stuff, and I tell people, running political organizations, that rather than thinking that if somebody else gets a slice of the pie, they'll go hungry, they need to realize that only 10% of the pie is down there for 90% of us, but 90% of the pie is up there being eaten by 10%.
In 1992, Hartford's first drag ball, Hartford Sizzles, spearheaded in part by the Hartford Gay and Lesbian Health Collective, is held at the community center. Other balls were held from 1993 to 1997 by the House of Everlasting Empire, the House of Nations, the House of Freedom, the House of Flava, the House of Ebony and the House of Pleasure. All houses generously donated thousands of dollars to various community projects and non-profit institutions.
Well, I remember when the Gay and Lesbian Health Collective sponsored Paris is Burning as a benefit, and it was held at Cinema City, and it was a fabulous event. The place was packed, and I remember Michael Cohen running out into the lobby at the end and saying to Linda Esterbrook, and I remember a few were standing there at that time, but saying, we have to do something, we have to bring this here, we have to do it.
The energy in that room, the first ball was incredible. Right. And it brings the community together. That was the most important part. For a cause, always. And bring a lot of people that we didn't know or we didn't have access to them, to see them, to mingle with them, to be friends, to be enemies, of course, to run away from them in some cases. But was very fun. Was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Pluck your eyebrows on the way, shaved the lace, and then he was a sheep. She said, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side. Said, hey honey, take a walk on the wild side. Candy came from out on the island.
People who are seeing this video and never went to a ball, and they're watching this for the very first time, you missed it. Good times, good times. Yeah. And so the process, what was it all about for you? What if you were explaining it to somebody, what would you tell
I actually explained it to people at work today. And I started off saying that it was basically synonymous to the fraternities and sororities, and that it was basically gay fraternity, sorority type organizations. And I explained the whole how Paris is burning and how the house started in New York. And it was basically, as far as I remember, they were actually houses that kids who were kicked out of their homes for being gay, and that they're these people would take them in, they formed a house, and you had people playing the mother and figures, and then they started having the balls down there. We took the balls from New York and brought them to Connecticut, and we changed it because we were all pretty much self-sufficient.
Yeah, we were like runaway kiddos.
Yeah. And a lot of, we had a lot of diversity. It wasn't just for the people neighborhoods. There's people all over the gay community, and it was a chance to come together and raise money for AIDS projects, breast cancer, just make some money and give it to charitable foundations. And it also provided some structure for gay youth coming in, and it provided structure for myself. It was what I
all that you can.
without them knowing your really name. Party. Tough realness. Tough realness. What list?
The DJ's list.
This thing? There is no guest list tonight. Go, Miss Thing. Would make any woman envious.
Lost like way too many friends already, and lost, during and beyond that. So for any of the balls to be able to raise money and give it back to HIV and AIDS organizations was just
But it's so nice to see so many together tonight. But what this ball is all about tonight is the fact that AIDS continues to devastate our community. As you saw from our program book, one of the people that isn't here with us tonight, but is with us in spirit, is the latex queen of the House of Pleasure, and I'd like a round of applause for Paco Martinez.
There's a Crawford Davis and a tacky Cary Grant, and some homeboys looking for trouble down here from the Bronx. But there ain't no Harry and no Virgin Mary. You won't hear those voices again. And Johnny Rio and Rotten Rita, you never see those faces again. This Halloween is something to be sure, especially to be here without you. There's the Born Again Losers and the Lavender Boozers and some crack team from Washington Heights. The boys from Avenue B, the girls from Avenue D, a Tinkerbell and Tights. This celebration somehow gets me down, especially when I see you're not around.
In 1992, Robin McClellan, studying for her master's degree in social work, begins organizing the first Children from the Shadows conference. The University of CT School of Social Work approved the idea of creating a conference about LGBT youth and the risks associated with sexual minority status. Connecticut State Department of Children and Families, the Department of Education, Mental Health and Addiction Service, and more than 30 grassroots organizations join. In 1995, the first queer prom is organized by members of the Hartford Gay and Lesbian Health Collective. The prom is to give youth a safe environment for their participation, to be themselves and to not have to hide as at a high school prom. In 1996, representatives of LGBT groups, American Friends Service Committee, the Connecticut Coalition for Cuba and others form the Coalition for a Real Debate, to speak out on the issues that the candidates for president are ignoring. A rally in Bushnell Park and a march to the Bushnell is held during the debate between candidates Bill Clinton and Bob Dole. Jesse Jackson, who attends the debate at the Bushnell, announces to the media that he is in support of the Coalition for a Real Debate and in full support of LGBT rights. In 1993, an opera based on Gertrude Stein's children's book, The World is Round, with music by composer James Sellers and libretto by Juanita Rockwell, has its world premiere in Hartford at the Wadsworth Athenaeum. Sellout crowds attend all of the performances. In 1997, the Connecticut Coalition for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual and Transgender Civil Rights hold the first annual OUT Awards to recognize individuals, community groups, organizations and businesses who have made outstanding contributions to the LGBT community. In 1999, the Connecticut Coalition for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Civil Rights, the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, and statewide groups hold Equality Begins at Home, a week-long program of events around the state and across the nation. Connecticut becomes the first state to fly the rainbow flag over a state capitol building. In 1999, the Stonewall Foundation, the Her History Archives of the CT Coalition for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Civil Rights, and the Hartford Collection opens an exhibition, Challenging and Changing America, The Struggle for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual and Transgender Civil Rights 1900 to 1999, at the Hartford Public Library. The exhibition is made up of archives from the Foster Gunnison Jr. collection at the Dodd Center Yukon, the Equity and Diversity collection at CCSU, community members' archives, and research. After a month showing at the Hartford Public Library, the exhibition travels to the Dodd Center at Yukon and then to Ellie Hubbard Library at Central CT State University.
And I would like to introduce Richard Nelson, the weaver of this exhibit and the project's coordinator of the Connecticut Stonewall Foundation.
Welcome to all of you tonight. I'm going to keep it short. Our people have long been the poets, and many times our poets have been denied to us. Tonight Bessie is here to read and Lonnie Black is here to read. And I just want to say it's a joy to have done this exhibition, and I'm quite proud and honored to have been able to put it together. And I hope everyone comes and brings more people to see it.
The exhibition is titled Challenging and Changing America, The Struggle for Lesbian and Gay, Bisexual and Transgendered Civil Rights. I think first we'll start talking about Faces of the Past. Our history has been ignored and denied by the dominant culture, and this exhibition is just offering 4 of our very famous people from throughout history. James Baldwin, the novelist, Virginia Woolf, a novelist, Sappho, the poet, and Christine Jorgensen. And over here we have Faces of the Present. Faces of the Present is our people today who are working in the movement American Heroes. Every out lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered person is a hero. One of the reasons we created this conversation with Faces of the Past and Faces of the Present is that since our history was denied either by the dominant culture or by sometimes our own people, that we would wanted to say, here are us today, out, opened, and there'll be no question in history who we were, who we loved, what we did.
A timeline of the history of the gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgendered community, dating back from 1900 until 1999. Richard, could you please explain a little bit?
Certainly. What we try to do with this section here is create a conversation between the timeline and the documents in the document display case to weave together our stories from the early days of the movement up till today when the show opened up. Joining us are 3 important key players in this exhibition, and I'll let them introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves and how they fit into weaving together this incredible story.
My name is Carolyn Gable, and I'm chair of the Connecticut Stonewall Foundation, and we've been so excited to have this exhibit to break some of the invisibility of the contributions of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. And we are particularly proud of our weaver and project director, Richard Nelson.
And my name is Rutherford Wittes. I'm a curator of manuscripts at the University of Connecticut Libraries. We are the home of the Foster Gunnison papers, and many of the materials in the exhibit are from his papers. He was an archivist of the gay movement here in Connecticut.
My name is Frank Aguiardi. I am the Associate Director at Central Connecticut State University. At Central, we have the papers of the George W. Henry Foundation as well as the Hartford Women's Center. And it's been a pleasure to be able to pull things from these collections and to loan them for this historic occasion.